"Do not look at him, Cecily," said the woman behind the pillar, in that carrying whisper meant to be heard by everyone in the room except the person it concerns. "They say the Yewbank luck takes whoever stands too near." Fabian, Duke of Yewbank, went on watching the dancers and did not turn his head, because he had heard some version of that sentence at every assembly he had attended for 9 years, and because turning his head was the one thing that made it worse. When he turned his head, people saw the left side of his face. When people saw the left side of his face, they were sorry, and then they were embarrassed at being sorry, and then they disliked him for having made them feel both things, and the whole weary machinery began again. So he stood where he always stood, in the deep window embrasure at the north end of Lady Pell's ballroom, with his back half to the light and his glass untouched on the sill, and he waited for the hour when a man might decently go home. He was not, whatever the county believed, a bitter man. That was the mistake everyone made. Bitterness would have required him to feel that he had been cheated of something, and Fabian had long ago done the accounts and found them square. He had Yewbank, which was 3,000 acres of good grazing and a house his grandfather had overbuilt. He had tenants who did not want for a roof. He had an infirmary in the market town that he had endowed and never once visited on a day when the subscription book was out. He had work. A man with work is not to be pitied. He had simply stopped expecting the other thing, the thing that happened in the middle of ballrooms to other people, and stopping had been, on the whole, a relief. The luck, so-called, had begun with his father, thrown at a gate in a wet November and dead before they got him to the house. It had gone on with the fire. There was no mystery about the fire. It had begun in a chimney in the east wing, and it had taken the east wing, and it had taken his brother Adrian, who was 22. Fabian had gone in for him twice. The second time he had got as far as the head of the back stairs, and the floor had gone, and what he brought out of that house was himself, and a left hand that would never again close past a certain point, and a face that people looked away from. He did not, then or afterwards, consider this a tragedy. His brother had not come out at all. That was the tragedy. What had happened to Fabian was merely the bill. 3 months later his betrothed had written to him. It was a kind letter, genuinely kind. He had read it perhaps 40 times over the years, and had never been able to find anything in it to resent, and it released him from an engagement he had told her twice he had no intention of breaking. Her family had been very firm about the luck. She had married a baronet in the spring, and Fabian had sent them a candelabrum, and had meant every good wish that went with it. And after that, the county had settled the matter comfortably among themselves. A scarred man, a burned wing, 3 deaths in 5 years, a broken engagement. Cursed. It was so much simpler than any of the true explanations, and it had the great advantage of relieving everybody of the duty to speak to him. He came to the assemblies 4 times a year because his aunt required it, and because the infirmary's subscription list was passed round at the supper interval, and men gave more when the man they were giving to was standing in the room. That was the whole of his purpose. He arrived after the crowd, stood in the north window, spoke to his aunt, signed the book, and was in his carriage by 11. And in 9 years not one person under 50 had crossed the floor to speak to him unless obliged. The musicians began to tune for the first set. Fabian took out his watch, which was a small private ritual of his. The first set was the noisiest quarter of an hour, and a good moment to be seen leaving, and it was while the watch was open in his palm that he became aware that the room had begun, in patches, to go quiet. He looked up. A young woman was crossing the floor. She was coming from the far side past the card-room door, straight up the length of that polished floor toward the north window, and she was quite alone. There was nothing hurried about her. She wore a gown of pale sprigged muslin, not new. Her dark hair was done simply, with 2 combs, and she walked as though she had made up her mind about something a long while ago, and was now merely arriving at it. The whispering came up behind her like water behind a boat. He heard a woman say, "Where is she going?" and another say, "Surely not," and he saw Lady Pell's fan stop halfway to her face, and Fabian, with a sensation of cold that he could not at once account for, understood that there was nothing behind him but a window and a wall. She stopped 3 feet away and curtsied. "Your Grace." "Ma'am." He shut the watch. 9 years of practice put his voice exactly where he wanted it. "I think you have mistaken your direction. The supper room is through the further door." "No, sir," she said. I have not mistaken it. She had grey eyes, and she was looking at him, at the whole of him, at the left side as steadily as the right, without flinching, without that quick charitable slide away that he had learned to expect within the first 2 seconds. He found that he had put his hand behind his back and that he was angry with himself for doing it. "My name is Amabel Wynne," she said. "My mother was Mrs. Wynne of Culvery, and I am staying with my aunt for the season. I have no fortune and no connections that would interest anybody in this room, so you may take what I am about to say entirely at its own value." Somewhere behind her the fiddles found their note and held it. The floor was filling. He could feel 100 faces turning. "Miss Wynne." "The first set is forming," said Amabel Wynne. "I am aware that a lady does not ask, and that I shall be talked of, and I have considered it, and I find I do not mind." She lifted her chin very slightly, and her voice was not quite steady, and she did not stop. "Your Grace, will you dance the first with me?" For a moment Fabian could not have said a word if the house had been burning again. He had been asked for money, for favours, for livings, for the loan of his name. He had not been asked for anything of himself since he was 29 years old, and he discovered that he had no defence prepared for it at all. What he felt first, absurdly, was not gladness. It was fear, the flat animal fear of a man being offered a thing he has taught himself for 9 years not to want. So he gave her the way out. He had grown expert at giving people the way out. It was, he had always thought, the last courtesy left to him. "Miss Wynne," he said quietly, "you are new here, and you've been very kind, and I am going to pretend this did not happen. In half an hour you would be asked why you did it, and by Sunday there would be a reason invented for you, and it would not be a pleasant one. Go back to your aunt." "I shall not think the worse of you." "I know what they say," said Amabel Wynne. "Then you know they will say it of you." "I know what they say," she repeated, "and I know that it is not true, and I have been waiting 3 years for the chance to say so in a room where somebody might hear me." Her hands were shut at her sides. "In the spring of the fever year my mother lay 11 days at Culvery. We had no money for a physician from the town. On the 4th day a physician came, and came every day after, and would take nothing, and would not say who had sent him, and there was a coffin found for her afterwards, and the burial paid, and no name given anywhere." She swallowed. "I came down the stairs at 2 in the morning on the 9th night, Your Grace, because I heard the door. You were standing in the passage with your hat in your hand, telling our girl not to wake me. I have known your face since I was 19 years old, and I have listened to this county call you unlucky for 3 years, and I find that tonight I have run out of patience with it." The fiddles struck up. Somewhere down the room couples were making their bows. "They are forming," said Amabel. "Please." Fabian put out his right hand. She did not take it. She reached instead, deliberately and quite unhurriedly, and took his left, the ruined one, the one he kept behind his back and inside a glove and out of the light, the one no living soul had touched since the surgeon. And she closed her fingers around it as though it were the most ordinary object in the world. He heard himself make a small sound. He hoped afterwards that the music had covered it. "Then I am at your service, Miss Wynne," said the Duke of Yewbank, and led her onto the floor. He had not danced in 9 years, and he had thought he would have forgotten it, and it turned out that a man forgets nothing. His feet knew where to go while his mind stood back in astonishment. They danced the whole set. The room watched them do it with a sort of scandalized hush that gradually, somewhere about the 3rd figure, turned into something else. Because it is very difficult to keep believing in a curse while it is dancing quite correctly in front of you and looking, for the first time in living memory, like a man. His aunt Lady Pell wept openly into her fan and told everyone within reach that she had arranged the whole thing, which was a lie, which nobody contradicted. At the end he bowed, and Amabel curtsied, and he walked her back to her aunt, and the county fell over itself getting out of their way. He called at her aunt's house on the Tuesday. He had put it off until Tuesday because he had spent Monday composing and burning a letter that explained with great clarity why she must not encourage him. He said it aloud instead, standing in a small parlour with his hat in his hand. "You should understand what it is you would be taking. Not the fortune, that part is simple, and I would settle it so that you were safe whatever became of me. The other part. You would be Duchess of Yewbank, and every drawing room you entered for the next 40 years would go quiet for a half-second before it remembered its manners. Your friends' mothers would warn them. Someone would tell you, kindly over tea, that you had been very brave. And you would be married to a man who cannot hold a pen in his left hand and whose face. He stopped and made himself finish it, because he had promised himself he would not be delicate. Whose face frightens horses and children, and on a bad morning himself. Amabel Wynne put down her sewing. Your Grace, she said, I have 3 things to say, and then I should like some tea. The first is that I have never once been frightened of you. The second is that I do not consider myself brave, and if anybody says so to me over tea, I shall tell them precisely what I have told you, which is that a man who pays for a stranger's mother to die comfortably, and then walks home in the dark, so that no one will thank him, is not unlucky and is not cursed. He is the best man in this county, and it has been too lazy and too stupid to notice. She folded her hands. The third is that you have talked for 4 minutes about what I should be taking on, and not one word about what you want. I should like to hear that part, please, and then I should like some tea. He was quiet for a moment. I want, said Fabian, to come home and find somebody in the house. Then that is settled, said Amabel Wynne, and rang the bell. They were married in October at the church on the Yewbank road. It was not a large wedding, and it was an extremely happy one, and the county came in force, having by then thoroughly revised its opinions and being anxious that this should be noticed. The east wing was opened in the spring. She had asked him, on her first walk through the house, why the door at the end of the long corridor was locked, and he had told her, and she had said nothing at all for a while, and then, Adrian, what did he like? Nobody had asked him that in 9 years. It came out of him in a flood. Horses, the terrible singing, the way he could never be got out of bed before 10, and Fabian stood in his own corridor and laughed and wept at the same time, and was not ashamed of either, and in April the builders came. And by the following summer there were lamps burning at the end of that passage, and a room called Adrian's room, with his brother's saddle on a stand in it, and the window open to the park. They danced at Yewbank at midsummer, in a hall that had not been used for anything but storing apples since the fire. He led her out for the first set in front of 200 neighbours, and he gave her his left hand without thinking about it, which she noticed and did not remark upon until much later that night, when she said it quietly against his shoulder and felt him go still. I stopped counting the years, he told her, the night you crossed that floor. I nearly turned back twice, said Amabel. You did know, she said. I did not. The Duke of Yewbank lived to be a very old man, greatly loved in his own country and privately regarded by strangers as one of the luckiest fellows alive. And when he was asked, as he sometimes was, how a man came by such fortune, he never spoke of the estate or the acres or the long peaceful years. He said that he had once stood in a window at the north end of a ballroom, waiting for 11 o'clock, and that a girl in a sprigged muslin gown had walked the whole length of the floor with everybody staring at her, and had taken his bad hand in front of the world, and had asked him to dance.